Hello and welcome to Future Squared. Stephen Hawking once said that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, so let's adapt. My name is Steve Glaveski, and each week I'll bring you conversations with preeminent thought leaders from a variety of fields to help you think in a multidisciplinary way, keep goals in your professional and personal life, and better navigate what is fast becoming a brave, new world. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation accelerator that works with organizations to unlock their people's latent potential to create more impact for humanity and lead more fulfilling lives. If you need help driving your organization's innovation strategy, visit collectivecampus.io. And without further ado,
come with me if you want to live.
But when people say, we should do something about it, I'm outraged. That's not a solution. There's so much problems. And the other side, the funny thing is, and I don't know if it's like this in Australia, but in this country, we have this, the government is so inept about doing things. The government should come up with a better solution. I'm like, wait, you just got done saying that they were inept. Why is it their job? Like, Go ahead and lead that way. And I'm not doubting people's sincerity. There's some problems in the world, but just a hashtag, an awareness, it starts with awareness, but doing something is everything.
welcome back to Future Squared for episode number 365 with Don Wettrick. Don is the president and founder of StartedUP, an organization dedicated to help transform the school culture toward innovation and enable student-led entrepreneurship. He is also innovation coordinator at Noblesville High School and author of Pure Genius, building a culture of innovation and taking 20% time to the next level. Don has worked as a middle school and high school teacher, educational and innovation consultant, CEO and podcast host. Don has lectured across the US, Europe, South America, and Africa about collaboration, social media use, and work environments that enable innovation. Through his travel, he's worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs from Silicon Valley to Ghana and seeks to bring their entrepreneurial mindset into our classrooms. His podcast, StartedUP, has featured some of the most successful entrepreneurs, authors, and thought leaders in the world, focusing on educational change. Given my work with the Lemonade Stand Children's Entrepreneurship Program, I really enjoyed my conversation with Don as we riffed on all things student entrepreneurship. We covered myriad topics, including 1, the difference between teaching entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial thinking, 2, why the current tendency to play the victim card instead of take ownership is limiting the potential of today's youth and their contributions to the world, and 3, where today's K-12 school system falls short and how to plug these gaps. These 3 topics only scratch the surface of what we discussed. So sit back and enjoy my conversation with the one and only Don Wettrick. Welcome to the show, Don.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. Joining me all the way from Indiana, I understand.
Yes, Indianapolis, Indiana.
So having grown up in the early 90s as a huge NBA fan, every time I hear Indiana, I can't help but think Reggie Miller. Like, that's the first thing that I associate with.
That was our most iconic player for sure.
Yeah, definitely most iconic player to come out of Indiana. Some might associate Indiana with the Indianapolis.
Our most iconic player to come out of Indiana was Larry Bird.
Well, to come out of Indiana, correct. Not to play for Indiana.
There you go.
Great distinction. Quick wit. I like it. That's what we're here to talk about today. Quick wit, student entrepreneurship. And essentially, you're doing a hell of a lot of work in that space. You're an innovation coordinator at Noblesville High School. You're the CEO and founder, essentially, of the StartedUP organization, which is basically dedicated to transforming school cultures towards innovation and enabling student-led entrepreneurship. And you're also the author of a book called Pure Genius. But at its core, how do you define your work, Don, in terms of what's your overarching mission?
So this has been a lot of thinking. So Yeah, the StartedUP Foundation has a mission and vision to get more students into an entrepreneurial way of being. That is a nice way of saying we don't expect everybody to be an entrepreneur, but we expect them to embrace that essence. That instead of complaining about things, instead of constantly, taking to Twitter to saying I'm upset, an entrepreneurial way of being, you start looking for solutions, you start building teams, you start looking for things to execute on. And so we think that that's going to be really helpful towards the mental health aspect of a lot of our youth. Mm-hmm. And we just want to get them to that entrepreneurial way of being.
And I think that's a great place to start this conversation, because there is sometimes a bit of I suppose confusion about entrepreneurship. And, I know you work on something called Future You, where it's all about developing student entrepreneurship. And I do something similar with Lemonade Stand. And some of the pushback I get is, well, they're still kids. We shouldn't be teaching them about business. They're still young. But ultimately, it's about the difference between an entrepreneur and an entrepreneurial mindset. And an entrepreneurial mindset, as captured by, say, Clayton Christensen in his book, The Innovator's DNA, it's about questioning, observing, challenging the status quo, associational thinking, so connecting dots between different things to make you a better problem solver, and essentially what I like to call Trojan horse thinking, right? If you encounter a problem, how can you craft a novel way around that problem? How can you circumvent that problem to move yourself forward rather than just sit back and play the victim card? Yeah,
that's 100% correct. And I think that we're really fighting against popular culture right now. Mm-hmm. Like right now, where we stand is whoever has it worst wins. And by the way, like that's not to say that people can't have non-ideal situations. Mm-hmm. Ironically enough, there's a guy on our board of directors, and he's a friend. He had an upbringing that I wouldn't wish upon anybody. He was raised by prostitutes, literally. He didn't basically have parents. His dad was a pimp and his mom ended up leaving. And so he has every right to say life didn't treat me well, but he went ahead and he found ways to work around it. Mm-hmm. That's what we're looking for. That's the entrepreneurial way of being. And the common culture is, nothing's your fault. Something's against you. The system is rigged and you can never achieve anything. Well, I'm like, what the hell are we supposed to do? Yeah. Curl up in the fetal position and say, well, we're all done here. The people that want to push past that do. And I wish everybody had ideal situations, but I'm sure you found this too. Some of the most successful people I know, Steve, had less than ordinary lives, and they wish sometimes I think one of the biggest curses to have is just a really normal life because you don't want to push past anything.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, I wrote an article about this a little while ago called When You Peak Early, You Lose. And I saw this with a lot of people who I used to work with, say, 10 years ago at big firms like Ernst & Young and KPMG. Young kids in their 20s who got promoted ahead of time tended to take a lot of identity out of that and basically would not consider alternative paths of action. But what they essentially ended up doing in a lot of these larger organizations was basically playing a role, which was around just following set procedure, which is basically the antithesis of innovation. And that's something that today's school system essentially helps develop, right? It's about teaching kids to follow rules, to be compliant, and ultimately to be managers who follow procedure. But what ultimately happens when the world changes and when those rules no longer apply and when the spoils go to someone who breaks the rules and who thinks laterally? And then those people suddenly find it very difficult, and that's when the victim card comes out.
Yep. And I think some of the biggest proponents of not allowing this to happen are parents. Like they have 200 years of being corrective. Look, if my son or daughter just shuts their mouth and gets through school and memorizes things short term, everything will work out fine because they'll go to a famous college. Well, the data on that is out, and that's starting to trend the opposite way. So I get it. I do understand why they thought that way, but now we're having a ton of students graduate with a ton of college debt, and they don't have necessarily skills. They have a degree, but they don't have skills. And I'll say this all the time. I graduated from college in 1995. I did not go to school to learn. I went to school to get a degree. And it got me a job in 1995 because I had a degree. Now that's just silly. The world has changed so dramatically that if you don't have acquirable skills, no one cares that you have a diploma. It's just, well, in certain areas, there are still certain areas that you have to, obviously, they're impressed. But like, even if you have a diploma, you have to have a diploma plus skills. And that message needs to be at the forefront of what we're doing.
100%. And I think when you speak with a lot of leading tech entrepreneurs and venture capitalists and whatnot, what they always say is we're looking for attitude first and skills second. Because you might have the skills, but if you're trying to do something that is fundamentally fraught with uncertainty, it's challenging, it's difficult. It's the attitude that's going to get you the result, not the skills.
Yep.
And I mean, something else you touched on there, Don, that I wanted to double click on, so to speak, is this conflict of interest between what parents might expect because they went through the school system and for them it was rote learning, it was getting the grade, it was getting the score to get into the university, to get the job. But many of them may still not be aware or fully appreciate the fact that what kids learn is perhaps not preparing them for what's coming, say 10, 15 years down the track. I mean, depending on which report you read, the OECD report found that, say, 40% of today's jobs won't exist in 10 to 15 years. And there's a hell of a lot of jobs that already exist today that didn't exist, say, 20 years ago. I mean, things like digital marketer wasn't really big 20, 25 years ago. What we're doing, podcasting right now, cloud architects, app developers, information security analysts, so many different roles that have come about. But perhaps that conflict of interest between parents and kids and the future is perhaps putting kids on the wrong path, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because like, don't get me wrong. School is really great up to a certain point. You could argue up to maybe, till you're 12, 13, 14 years old. But then you start just recirculating like different things because we've always done it that way. And I mean, in 1890, when they're like, hey, we need to prepare people for factories, we did a good job of that. But all these things that we haven't considered of what new careers are, which is, by the way, let me transition to why I started our class. Our class was called Innovation into Open Source Learning. And that was to say, I taught you the skills of how to think for yourself, how to whiteboard, how to backward design, how to, look at a SWOT chart, lean canvas, whatever. And actually how to also take your digital brand seriously. But the rest of the year was open source learning because it became the catch-all. Because if a student said, hey, I want to be able to be a cloud architect or learn how to code in Python, I didn't know either of those things. So we open sourced our learning. It was one class a day where you said, hey, I want to contact people that are experts in their area and learn from them. That's shockingly simple.
Yeah, it is shockingly simple, although what I've seen with a lot of schools and teachers and faculty members in general is this sort of aversion to stuff that's either not invented here or not endorsed by the school in some way, and that to just jump online and get onto YouTube or use something that hasn't been endorsed, well, that's a big no-no. You don't do that.
Well, or and I say this lovingly as a 21-year educator, or the fear that the teacher doesn't know everything. I don't.
Yeah.
And that's why I liked him, like open source learning, because, there are some kids that are working on projects that I would never know how to do. And that's fine. I became their project manager. I became like, I'd poke at them like, when is it going to be due? When are you doing? What's your update? Have you, let your audience know? Like, that's fine. Like, there's so many things that we do in school and that have prepared them for that next level. That's why I'm not bashing all school. It's just that every school should have a period in the day where it is truly about you learning and acquiring skills. But it's also hard because the kids have played the game of school so long. And that's the thing that because once I gave him this opportunity, I'm like, okay, now it's on you. Because, when I first started the class and oh man, finally a class where I can do what I want. All right, what do you want to do? I don't know. Just give me an essay or something. Like, people like their prison cell.
Yeah.
Every year, people like, and by the way, I'm trying to get back into shape. It's fun to say, man, I'm going to get in shape. You know what the hard part is? Getting your ass off the couch. It sucks. So we have a culture now, like they're starting to question it. Man, education's outdated. We need to do something new. And then when you offer it, don't be surprised when a lot of kids go, well, I mean, that's hard.
Yeah. And I guess a lot of that comes back to evolutionary programming in a way, wanting to conserve energy. And we see that in the corporate world too. I mean, I've done a lot of work in the innovation consulting space, and oftentimes large companies or executives at large companies will say, yeah, we want to change. But when push comes to shove, the idea of actually changing is so much more difficult than just executing on that set procedure, collecting the paycheck and enjoying your weekend.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are those things that we're tussling with, but I guess that then ties into things like, momentum. Just doing the smallest possible thing actually develops some momentum. And I think if you take that and apply it to change in the school system, it's not about, completely overhauling everything, because like you've alluded to a couple of times, the school system still does a lot of great stuff, but it is about plugging those gaps that are obvious in the fast changing environment we find ourselves in.
Right, which means we're so close.
Exactly.
I mean, seriously, Steve, I do not think, and if we try it, I think it's going to fail. We should always be online and learning and not having to learn together. It's going to be a mistake. Mm-hmm. People like to learn together. Just give us opportunity. Well, right now, as we speak, my daughter has been, she's at a university, mm-hmm. and it was kind of tied to the university, but she's at a startup weekend. Mm-hmm. She has dedicated Friday, Saturday, and now Sunday working with a team of 5 people. She's working her butt off. Why? Because it's fun to work with a team. It's fun to work with a group if you believe in it. And so I think that the trend of, let's throw all of school out, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater, it's a bad idea. School is really close to being able to get it right. Just, we need to pivot a little bit, especially the high school level. And well, I'll quote the great Seth Godin. Mm-hmm. High school can be boiled down to 2 things: solving interesting problems and leadership. You give some students some interesting problems to solve, and then they'd have to have the leadership skills to get it done. You're going to find some really interesting things coming out of our high schools.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you're absolutely right with respect to working in teams. I mean, just from the perspective of emotional well-being and being able to navigate the society we find ourselves in, being able to actually work with other people, look them in the eyes, something that perhaps is a skill that many people are losing in this world where it's easy to just, I suppose, retire into our devices and sit on our couches and watch Netflix every night, much to the detriment of actually creating impact in the world. But on what you said there around working in a team with people you believe, working on a team on something you believe in, rather. Now, that kind of aligns with something that Jim Collins talks about in Good to Great, this hedgehog theory, where he says, do something that you could be the best in the world into, something that you're really good at, do something that you're passionate about, and do something that obviously fuels your economic engine. So it's got to make some money, obviously. Those 3 things, because if I think back to, say, when I was 17, sitting in the career counselor's office in year 12, being asked, what do you want to do with your life, kiddo? There was no consideration around what was I actually good at. What did I believe in? It was more so, what's going to pay me? So I basically went off to university and studied accounting for 3 years and worked for EY and KPMG and these brands for about 10 years before I realized that I absolutely hated it. And then went down the entrepreneurial track. So, I mean, what are you seeing in terms of helping to identify what kids should be, or helping to identify the strengths that students have so that they can double down on that rather than just jump on that assembly line and come out an accountant and a lawyer or a doctor? Not that there's anything wrong with those roles, but those roles might be wrong for them.
Yeah, I mean, so once again, and by the way, I'm not trying to say this, that there's an adversarial relationship, but this is also where you have to fight the parent and big college battle because one, well, son or daughter, there's a lot of jobs in X, Y, and Z area. I don't care if you don't like it, just run to safety, because there's a lot of 40 and 50-year-olds that still believe that a good job will be a life job and that it'll somehow equal safety. And so instead of pushing the skills for them to start, like even in my 47-year-old brain, sometimes I feel like I'm sounding flim-flammy, but like how to build a network. how to take LinkedIn seriously. So important.
Yeah.
But the parents are like, well, it worked for me in 1990, whatever. And I understand it did work for them. But those career jobs are dwindling. And so I think the nice thing is now talk of automation and things that are changing before our eyes. There's now this willingness to say, okay, you might want to start chasing something that you're truly passionate about. And can you build something around that passion? In our class, we had a rule of thirds, right? Every time you put in a proposal to work on a project, the first rule is, are you passionate about it? Do you love it? Okay, that's easy. I'm passionate about, spending time with my son. That's easy. Or, okay, number 2, what skills are you acquiring? Well, just because you like watching Netflix doesn't mean you're going to acquire skills. So that second rule was kind of tough. And the third one was, who is it going to serve other than you? Which ultimately is, and I know that you know this, which is ultimately about sustainability. Because if you do something that's totally going to benefit you, people figure that out and then eventually stop buying your thing. So by forcing the kids to think about those 3 things, we had one student that basically he was wanting to learn about day trading. You want to learn more about stock market, see if he could, make a living trading stocks every day. And so I said, all right, rule of thirds. Number 1, are you passionate about it? Yes. Number 2, are you going to acquire skills? He's like, oh my gosh, holds, puts. I don't know anything about the options market, but I'm going to. Of course. I said, number 3, who is it going to benefit other than you? I don't know. And I said, well, I want to approve it, but I can't until you prove and help somebody else. So the kids started a stock picking club during study hall. Now that did 2 things for him. Number 1, it got me off of his back. So I approved it. And number 2, he started learning. Well, number 1, he was doing research and then he became the teacher, but when you become the teacher, you kind of have to stay ahead of your pupils kind of thing. So he was learning a lot, passing it on to others, but then the group started to learn from each other. He ended up admitting it would have been much worse had he just gone on by himself. And so by showing kids that, if it's just about you, it's not sustainable. I don't care if you're successful. Don't be a jerk about it. And I love those 3 things because that shows our kids that you can be entrepreneurial and a nice person and learn together with teams, which I think is the heart of it.
100%. And it's like Zig Ziglar once said, if you want to make $1 billion, help 1 billion people. You obviously can't be sustainable if it's just benefiting you. Nobody's going to pay you. And if they do, they're not going to pay you a second time and refer their friends and all the rest of it. So that's a great point. On the notion of supposedly safe jobs, Don, if I look at once safe jobs like accounting, NPR published a report which found that 95% of accounting tasks can be automated. And I know this from my time in that world and looking at things like financial audit, for example, which makes up about 50% of the revenue of the big 4 accounting firms. That stuff is very, very process oriented. And it's not to say that there won't be a need for humans in that space, but maybe there'll be a need for maybe, say, 1/10 the number of humans that we currently have now, just reviewing the output of an automated process. And that's something that Alec Ross, who wrote Industries of the Future, also spoke about when I had him on the podcast, that there will be no room for mediocrity in the future in these once safe industries and that the need for people will be much lower than it is today. Having said that, there's a lot of push around STEM nowadays. And while I am 100% on board with STEM in terms of it helping to develop people's decision-making ability, more computational thinking, more lateral thinking, in terms of it actually leading to safe jobs, say in the computer sciences, for example, in the web development space, whatever it is, to me, I mean, my view for a number of years now has been that we're going to have a lot of people in the developing world coming online who can do many of these jobs, and many of these jobs will become commoditized in some way. I mean, where do you sit on that?
No, I mean, it already happened. It's called web developers. I was a lot of people in 1998. Hey, get your students to be web developers, and there was a good 2-year run. And then the talent pool started to be globalized, and then the cost of living I'm not going to get into the ethics of this because I know that there's an ugly side to then shipping all those jobs to third world countries, and do they have a livable wage? I can't control that, but I do know that a lot of times web developers then became pennies on the dollar compared to the United States people. And yeah, I mean, it's just what it was. And I've seen a lot of experts kind of start pumping the brakes on some of the STEM development stuff too, because, by the way, this is not my forte. I'm just listening to some of them. But the whole software starting to write its own software kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's I like, again, not my thing, but I've seen the fact that we've seen this pattern before should make us pause and go, okay, let's think deeply about where to go next. However, I do know something, and this is dark and this is awful, but based off of the movie WALL-E, I know one job that's not going to go away, and that is entertainment. We're going to be if you've ever seen the Pixar film WALL-E, it's kind of this. Yeah. Well, what do we end up doing? Humans end up sitting around a spaceship watching TV. So there was one job, and that was somebody who was on TV. It was on a screen. So I see some parallels to that. So I like, when your kid goes, I want to be a professional streamer, like, believe it or not, there may be actually more reality in making that happen than your son saying, well, I'm not going to poop on somebody's career, but there's obviously some careers that are going to go away and everybody knows it. So entertainment's actually going to be high on that list.
Yeah, I actually know quite a few teenagers who are on the YouTube, and they've got their own channels with tens of thousands of subscribers. And, on the surface of it, from where I'm looking, it doesn't look like they're doing anything transformational, but people absolutely love it. So it must be a generation gap thing. So I was going to talk about STEM a little bit further, just on the notion of knowing what to build versus being able to build it. Now, this is something where we see this so much in the startup domain, where we have entrepreneurs who are developers. Their background is in web development, so they're builders by nature, and they'll go out, they'll build the thing, they'll be super excited about it, they'll be in stealth mode, they'll release it, and absolutely what they get in return is crickets. And that's because of this distinction between being able to build something and knowing what to build in the first place. And knowing what to build in the first place requires us to actually have our, ear to the ground. It requires us to collect a lot of dots. It requires us to speak to different people. It requires us to be able to think laterally enough and make that associational connection, and then come up with solutions, and not only jump to conclusions with those solutions, but then go off and test those solutions and learn how to learn from the data that we get from customer interactions and that sort of stuff. And then underlying all of that is, man, this stuff's really hard, and we've been trying this for 6 months and we're not getting anywhere, and being able to just move forward with that emotional fortitude that's required. That's oftentimes the difference between a successful entrepreneur and a failed one. It is all that soft skill and all of that persistence. As Calvin Coolidge said, nothing will take the place of persistence. Talent will not, education will not, genius will not. That's the sort of stuff that perhaps we're not, I wouldn't say perhaps, but we're not teaching in schools.
It's funny when you said that, because I was like going through some of my former years and students. And if you didn't have a balanced team, this is exactly what would happen. Sometimes, like, I loved it when the coder kid would meet the art kid. Yeah. Because the technically relevant student sometimes, and by the way, I'm grossly going to stereotype this, because like I had gray areas, but every now and then I'd get the student that was very tech enabled, and there was almost this condescending attitude of, look, I know what I'm doing. Yeah. And like the snarkiness that there's too many digital marketers out there, which you could argue, there might be, but like the real work gets done by the person that does the technology. And then the artistic one was like, you have no eye for design and layout. When those two kids would work with each other, magic happened. But if you had too many of the, I'm going to be a digital marketer and no technical skills, it wasn't a thing. And then if you had all technical skills and nobody that really understands the human element and design and marketing, you didn't have it. Therefore, shocker, a balanced team is always good. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that if we try to do anything, that's what we try to do in the class, is that, we try to weave those personalities and egos.
Yeah, well, it's all about a cross-functional team. And it's funny what you said there about tech plus design. It's a little bit like Apple in a way. I mean, that company embodies the whole marriage of design, great design and great technology.
Well, the funny thing is that's exactly though what would get a lot of the tech, I hate to use their tech nerds, but like they all are like, Wozniak was everything.
Yeah.
Jobs gets too much credit kind of thing. And yet it took both. And, I don't know. I loved it when those two types of personalities would blend. If they could, that's when magic would happen.
Yeah. Well, I came across an anecdote recently from Eric Ries, who wrote the book, The Lean Startup, which is really about learning what to build. When he met with Akio Toyoda, the CEO of Toyota, of course, and he was talking him through what the Lean Startup is and how it evolved out of lean manufacturing. And after some back and forth and some questions, it hit Akio and he said, I understand. All of these decades, we had a process for efficiently taking products to market, but we didn't have a process for learning what to take to market in the first place. Which
just that obvious.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
I like that hit. I like that it hit him. Just like that.
Just like that. But with preparing kids to deal with that sort of adversity that comes their way, I mean, the whole participation trophy thing has been done to death. That's been around for quite a while. And I think we're starting to see the fruits of that labor. And I use that word loosely, so to speak, nowadays with respect to, entitlement and, the victim cards that you were talking about at the start of our conversation. I see this with a lot of parents as well, because I grew up in, say, a working class part of Melbourne suburbs, and a lot of kids who are now parents, growing up, they didn't have all that much. But now what they're doing is, well, we've got good jobs now. We're going to make it as comfortable as possible for our kids. We're going to give them all the consoles. We're going to give them all the clothes. We're going to do everything for them, make it as comfortable as possible. But inadvertently, what they're doing then is actually not preparing them for the reality of the world around them, which is a lot of adversity, a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of rejection. So, obviously entrepreneurship can help prepare kids and help build that emotional fortitude. But what else are you seeing in this space in terms of the work you're doing or the work you've seen other people do?
Yeah, no, you hit it right on the head. There is a lot of awareness and a lot of passion. And I think that we fool ourselves into think that is a solution. Mm-hmm. There was a kind of a funny commercial here in the United States, and it was about basically it may have been for LifeLock, but basically there was a credit fraud awareness, and then there was like doing something about it. So there was this guard in a bank, and the guy come in with the robber come in with a gun, and the teller looks at the guard and he's like, "Aren't you going to do anything?" He says, "Oh no, I'm just burglar awareness." That's what you paid for. I think that with some of our, we're all very passionate. I think social media has made us aware of problems. But when we say, we should do something about it, I'm outraged. That's not a solution.
No.
There's so much problems. And the other side, the funny thing is, and I don't know if it's like this in Australia, but in this country, we have the government is so inept about doing things. Mm-hmm. The government should come up with a better solution. I'm like, wait, you just got done saying that they were inept. Why is it their job?
Yeah.
Go ahead and lead that way. And I'm not doubting people's sincerity. There's some problems in the world, but just a hashtag, an awareness, it starts with awareness, but doing something is everything.
Yeah, no, and it's exactly the same down here. We had all sorts of interruptions over the weekend with the Extinction Rebellion protests all over the city, and I know they're taking place all over the US and Europe at the moment as well. And while I'm definitely on board with supporting the environment as much as we possibly can, but at the same time, just protesting is only going to achieve so much. And there is something to be said about agency taking very far sometimes leads to some form of action. But I think it's easy for kids to jump on some sort of cause and use that as a fast track to moral righteousness in place of actually having to do the work and solve the problem and make a real contribution. It's much easier to just, Yeah.
It's very similar to when people watch sports.
Oh yeah.
They use the word we.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe we won that game last night. I'm like, you didn't play. And I see a lot of activism as we. No. Like, you're not. No, you made a tweet. You know, when we scored the touchdown, there was no we.
Yeah. And I think this is something that entrepreneurship, amongst other things, I mean, science as well at its core teaches the fact that we can never be sure we're right. We can only ever be sure we're wrong. So we can only ever falsify hypotheses. And people like Mark Andreessen, you know, one of the world's biggest VCs, says, you know, an entrepreneur should embody the philosophy of strong opinions loosely held. But what we're seeing nowadays with kids and most adults as well, I mean, let's face it, is strong opinions, and that's it. You know, that's my opinion, and I'm entitled to it. Like that, whenever I hear that, that's basically a cue to just stop reasoning with this person, because there is no reasoning with someone that holds that sort of philosophy. And then I'm sure your jaw would hit the ground if they would start like actually discussing possible solutions. Oh yeah. And I'm all for that. Yeah. I mean, I'm all, matter of fact, there's just the thing in the Wall Street Journal about that just yesterday, like, you know, offering solutions. That's what we're looking for. The coming up with a rhetoric of we should do something and things are awful. Okay. Fine. Like, I want things to get better too. Yeah. But if your answer is, well, still, it's not, I can't take that seriously. I can understand why you're upset, but like, if there's no dialogue and there's just somebody else is wrong and I'm on the right side, except I don't really have a solution yet, but I feel superior somehow because I have found that there is a problem. Oh, okay. Hooray. Yeah. So working towards a solution is everything. And when people shut other people down for wanting to ask questions and then have some solutions or a topic on solutions, you know, that's where things are stalling out. Yeah. Well, we're essentially shutting down discourse, and discourse is fundamental for problem solving. If you're not going to see the other person's side of the argument, or if you're only going to see things from an emotional lens and not an economic lens or a political lens, then you can't exactly reason your way to a positive outcome. You can only try and force it, which is only going to result in the sort of dogmatism and divisiveness we're seeing across various aspects of the political spectrum at the moment. Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, even in the classroom, if we take that concept of wanting other people to solve the problem for us, and this applies in large organizations, it also applies in K-12 classrooms where teachers and faculty might say things like, well, we'd love to do more, but we're constrained by our budget. We need more money. We need more resources. And I know more often than not, it's not a matter of more resources. It's a matter of just changing the way you do things. How are you seeing this play out in your work? And I know this is something you talk about in your book as well. Yeah, I mean, boy, I got thrown. This is the part where some people didn't like it, is that I had said that me not having all the budget I wanted was a blessing, because we got really creative and innovative with the things that we had. Yep. Now, mind you, I was at a school that wasn't in abject poverty. So in my experience, not having everything meant I didn't have the best of equipment. Yep. I've been to some schools that it's deplorable they had no equipment. So I'm not suggesting that having a budget of zero is a great thing. However, if innovation can be found in the poorest parts of, you know, any third world country, it can be done. I would prefer that everybody is fully funded. But at the same time, just as we were talking earlier, when everything is comfortable, innovation doesn't come up. Innovation comes out when there is a need and it is needed now, and there is a level of uncomfortableness. We made great strides when we have been in times of need and of crisis. So right now, things are going along. So that's my only concern, is that having everything sometimes can be absolutely not productive. Yeah. And I think that aligns with something that Malcolm Gladwell talked about with respect to success. I think it was in David and Goliath, when he highlighted that kids who have too much growing up tend to fall victim to that entitlement sort of syndrome, and they may not even have any hunger because it's like, well, I've already got everything. kids who don't have any resources growing up, they have it really difficult, even though they might have the drive and the ambition. It's really a Herculean task, but it's that space in between where you have some resources and you have some drive, but you've got enough to go forward. And it's the same when you take that into the classroom. Like, it shouldn't be, well, maybe, I mean, I can't speak conclusively with this, and I tried not to speak conclusively about anything, but when you have too much, then there is no innovation. And if we look at, say, the startup domain, something like growth hacking essentially was born out of necessity, because most startups don't have resources to spend on big, expensive, above-the-line marketing campaigns on television and everything else. So what do? Well, they look at ways to hack their growth. And if I think about Airbnb in their early days, when they found a way to basically hack into Craigslist, and anybody who had posted an apartment on Craigslist would basically get redirected to Airbnb's site, and that just fueled their growth in the early days. I mean, Craigslist eventually shut off that little loophole in their system, but that's the kind of thing that you do out of necessity. And it was, I think, Joe Gebbia and Brian Chesky, the founders of Airbnb, credit that for their early success and for keeping the lights on when otherwise they probably would have gone out of business. But if you have a lot of money, and we see the same in the startup domain, where early stage entrepreneurs might raise way too much money way too early before they've even validated their business model, they'll go on to spend all of it on a team and on marketing and on features that nobody ever asked for, and basically go out of business 12 months later. So that necessity is the mother of invention, I think, is what we're getting at.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you've spotlighted a number of young entrepreneurs on your podcast, the StartedUP podcast, which we'll link to in the show notes. I mean, what sort of things are you seeing come out of, say, teenage entrepreneurs nowadays?
It just depends. Like, on the ones that I've interviewed, again, there is kind of this correlation with some of them they identified a problem and they had a life a little less ordinary. Mm-hmm. That being said, though, I've seen, we just interviewed a guy. We have a podcast coming out in a couple weeks that he's into machine learning and AI for medicine, and we've seen, I don't know, just an explosion of Gen Z. I hate to like paint a wide brush, but Gen Z seems to be a little bit more interested in doing things on their own than millennials.
Why do you think that is?
I think that they see the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
I think that they see, I mean, number one, first of all, I have a ton of empathy for millennials. They were the punchline and they were the joke, but the joke was they did it the way we've always done it. And they were the first to get the rug pulled out. Hey, just shut up, keep your head down, go to a famous college and everything will work out. Well, the college debt crisis has fallen squarely on them, squarely. And so I think that it has hurt them. It has hurt their psyche. It has hurt their chances. I mean, I feel terrible because it's bad. So I think, and this is just totally my opinion, speculation, I think that Gen Z kind of took a look at that and like, okay, then I'm going to do things on my own. I'm going to learn how to build things on my own, because they had regret. And if their whole thing was, I just did exactly what my mom and dad told me, and I went to a college and I studied something, I think that they took a look at that and said, okay, then I won't do that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And just on augmenting that experience in the classroom, we talked earlier about technology, we talked about resources, we talked about using stuff that's basically open source essentially, so not having to create the content ourselves. What role can experts and mentors play when it comes to augmenting that experience for students?
Oh man, that's where it gets fun. I mean, some of our students, not all, some of our students like really owned the networking part, because you can save yourself years of struggle, or like, heck, like what is the most desired thing when you get out of school? Either a job or a connection to somebody that can get you a job. What if you found those connections now? What if you could start networking or collaborating with or learning from a person now? Like, high school kids have such an advantage if they start doing college-like networking now. And, some of our students got a lot of really cool insights, or in some cases, like free lessons, because they took that opportunity.
Yeah. And it's so easy to do nowadays. I mean, LinkedIn for me has been just the most valuable resource ever in terms of connecting with people, hundreds of people. And I think there is an idea that in order to connect with people, you've got to spend lots of money on conferences and whatnot. And conferences, more often than not, I find are a waste of time unless you're very targeted with why you're going, or very specific about why you're going, and very targeted about who you want to speak to at that conference and what you want to speak to them about. Otherwise, you can literally, with a tool like, say, Meet Alfred or something like that, message 100 people a day and personalize those messages and tee up conversations and whatnot. And nowadays, like this conversation, you're over in Indiana on the other side of the world. It doesn't take much to have a conversation with someone quite influential and just ask them some questions. And it's like people like Tim Ferriss like to say, modeling yourself of other people that have done what you want to do, and asking them questions like, what are the 3 big mistakes you see people make? And what are the 3 big things they can do to accelerate their progress? And that can save you a hell of a lot of heartache. But sometimes it's not even a matter of not knowing that you can do that. Some people are just scared to hear the truth in some cases.
Well, I mean, here we are talking because we got introduced by somebody, a mutual friend on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. But I hate it when people, well, Don, it's easy for you. Well, okay. Well, it was like, I, like everybody else, started off with 1 follower on Twitter. Yeah. And because I get this eye roll. Well, it's not what you know, it's who you know. You're right. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't run in your circles because you didn't ask. Mm-hmm. There's now sometimes like a little bit of righteous indignation because like I'm blessed that we have had, Tim Ferriss basically meet the class, that we've had, people in our classroom but we asked.
That's it.
Like I had 1 follower on Twitter and we did some relevant things. And yes, it is a lot of times it is not what you know, it's who you know, because the people all of a sudden start plugging you in like, hey, you have a certain skill set. You should consider this. That's not nepotism. That's not favoritism. It's just being aware of the situation. So when I hear people complain that it's somehow unfair and the world is stacked against you, a teacher in Nowheresville, Indiana, had just as many followers as you, but we asked and we got out there. And so like, I want more high school kids to use social media as a tool. I think that every high school student should like consider LinkedIn and treat themselves like a professional and share what they're wanting to do in the world. Yeah, because a lot of people find them and like, hey, I was like you as a kid, and those people have become helpful.
100%. It's funny. I'm about to release a kids picture book called Lemonade Stand, and I had Adam Grant and Brad Feld both endorse the book, and a lot of people said, "Oh man, how did you do that?" I'm like, well, I had them on my podcast a while ago. I promoted their book, and then I just sent an email and I asked, and they were quite happy to do that. But it's about putting in the time and doing things for other people as well. Like we said earlier, create value for other people. They might just help you as well, whether that's buying a product or whether that's endorsing your book. But you shouldn't do things with the expectation that you get something in return, but just creating value for the world. It sounds a little bit woo, but it's just essentially the way the universe works in many ways. You water the plants, they'll grow and you'll be able to pick your fruit and whatnot. But on teachers as well, obviously there's teachers who take ownership in the classroom, who are aligned with the mission. But then there's teachers who perhaps fell into the work because they didn't know what else to do. And they thought, I get, several weeks or months of leave every year. And it sounds like a pretty comfortable job. Maybe I'll only work 9 to 4, and they'll get into the classroom and they'll essentially just be the same types of people that we see in a lot of large organizations, ultimately just living for the weekend and not really aligned with the values or outcomes that the kids are looking for. What's your take on that?
I think the people that think that it's good and you'll live for the weekends last a year or two.
Okay. I
don't think they last. I think if you're in education and you stick with it, you are there as a calling. Now, are there some teachers that are still teaching it in the way we've always had? Yes, but I don't hold them, like, I'm not mad at them because they don't know what they know.
Yeah.
Because like teachers by and large were good students. That's why they felt, they felt successful at school. I should be a teacher. Well, they were good at school the way it used to be. And I see that that's why they're a little bit slow to like, hey, we should, open source this. We should have them, learn a little bit more freely. You shouldn't be in charge all the time. Well, you're taking away like what they enjoyed and what they were originally good at. So, I think 99% of all teachers, their heart's in the right place. They're staying. It's not for the money, and I think that they want to do what's right. I just don't think that they've been introduced to what the changing world looks like. And again, like, not mad. They're busy working on the craft of being a good teacher, but it's the craft of being a good teacher the way it's always been.
Yeah.
And that's my frustration, because like if I got into a soundbite moment, Don Wettrick said that teachers are uninformed. Well, yes, but no, to no fault of their own, because academia doesn't want to spend time thinking about these things. So am I mad at the teacher? No, but as Gary Vee has taught us, the market is the market. We'll adapt when all of a sudden massive change happens, and it's coming.
So with respect to what some people say that, teachers prepare kids to be teachers, that's essentially like an organic byproduct of the fact that they've gone through the system, they were great students, and they essentially want to give back by replicating what they saw. But they're just not prepared to change that because they've just not been informed yet. And they're my words, not yours. So we're not quoting Don there, or shown a different way. But that then comes back to everything we've been talking about in terms of bringing technology into the classroom, in terms of mentors, experts, open source content, because that can essentially augment the teacher's ability to create those outcomes, and they don't need to feel like they need to know everything as the teacher, as the scribe, or what do they say, the sage on the stage, essentially.
Yeah, because that whole thing is being disrupted, and it should. I mean, and ironically enough, like we get these in seminars. It's not the sage on the stage, it's the guide on the side, and except the slap in our faces. And I think this is where a lot of teachers are frustrated, and they do know the change should come. Is that like the number one thing we keep getting taught in colleges is like the test doesn't necessarily measure success or a lot of things. Yet most schools, their accountability and their funding is tied to random standardized tests that like really focus on a very small skill set.
Yeah.
And it's like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. And when that frustrates me, because we the United States has this reverence for schools in Finland. And, Finland, it's funny because they're like, hey, we don't really focus on the test. And so the United States is like, see, we should do what they do. And I'm like, okay, why are they so much better? Well, because look at their test scores. I'm like, wait. Like, huh? If it is kind of this double standard. We honor these schools. We say that we want creativity. We say that we want innovation, but we keep holding political accountability almost to schools that have great test grades. Test grades in what? Have we ever honored schools that has, a couple of patents being filed from the school?
Yeah. Well,
have we ever rewarded for schools that are like doing events and they're totally student run? No, it's the schools that get the honor is the ones that have the high SAT scores.
Well, that's a bit like looking at Instagram and saying, wow, this person has 100,000 followers. We should be just like them, and absolutely discounting every other dimension of that person's being. But they
must be making tons of money.
They must be making tons of money, and they must be an awesome person with amazing character. They must be. But Don, I know you have to run. This has been an absolute pleasure having you on the program. Where should people go to find out more about your work and connect with you online?
StartedUpFoundation.org, StartEd Foundation. And then Twitter, I'm kind of active, Don Wettrick, but really LinkedIn has been where I've been living a lot more now.
Fantastic. Well, we'll add all of that to the show notes for our listeners. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Steve. Appreciate you having me on.
Hi guys, Steve again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to receive a weekly email from me, complete with reflections, books I've been reading, words of wisdom, and access to blogs, ebooks, and more that I'm publishing on a regular basis, just leave your details at futuresquared.xyz/subscribe and you'll receive the very next one. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, take a minute to like, share, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It goes a long way to giving the podcast the exposure it needs so I can continue bringing you guests and conversations of the highest caliber. You can catch me on Twitter at Steve Glibeski and on Instagram at @TheSteveGlibeski. Until next time.
Hasta la vista, baby.